Hello viewers, this is Paladin of Odin, and this is some more Magic the Gathering Online. This is another episode of the Standard Commentary series. So turn 2 Hangerback Walker from the so far colorless side, and Magmatic Insight from the red-blue side. Buffing up the Walker. And passing the turn. Now I am curious whether or not this deck is colorless. Ooh, and a Skyline Cascade that will keep the Hangerback Walker tapped, so no more buffing for a little while. Ruins of Oran Reef, passing the turn. And it's looking like it's a solid colorless deck. And I had a look at the concept. You know, I had that idea that it's possible to make a colorless deck in the current standard, but I wasn't sold on the reliability. You know, especially in the face of decks that have proven themselves to be very, very good. But, you know, could be a new archetype in Standard, we just don't know yet. Magmatic Insight after a Sphinx's tutelage. Response from Colorless is Warping Whale, counter target sorcery spell. That's another new card. Colorless and one generic, exile target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. Not bad. Counter target sorcery spell, or put an Eldrazi Scion into play. He attacks with the Hangerback Walker. Second main phase, throws down a Thought-Knot Seer. Another solid, colorless creature. And I meant solid as in the quality of the creature. You know, a 4/4 for 4 is, you know, fine. But the ability, you know, you get to steal one of their cards, put it in exile, they never get that card back, and then when it dies, they get to draw a card. You know, nice and balanced creature. And he gets rid of Send to Sleep, which could be relevant. That is one of the ways that, you know, the mill deck has to slow down his opponents on attacking him. It's one of the few ways that he can go, oh no, you're not attacking me. And then allow me to draw some more cards and mill your deck while you still can't attack me. Anticipate. And it's a little unfortunate for the mill deck. Okay, attacking him for 6, then Anticipate doesn't actually draw him a card. It puts one of them into his hand. So it doesn't trigger Sphinx's tutelage. But then again, you know, the reason why it's like that is because things like Ponder were too powerful. Eldrazi Mimic. He's one ugly looking card. But, oh, a double Oran Reef, or Ruins of Oran Reef, makes it a 4/3. So it's actually quite a large Eldrazi Mimic. Now all he has to do is throw down a bigger Eldrazi. Well, one that's bigger than a 2/1. Another Anticipate. Oh, and there's a card that I was a fan of when I first looked at this new set, Reality Smasher. Now that is a really good card. Okay, Treasure Cruise, delving away his graveyard. That'll get him 3 triggers from Sphinx's tutelage. Ghostfire Blade, 2, 3, 4 land, and then Titan's Presence. And that's the thing about it. Tutelage will only ever get him 2 cards because colorless isn't a color. So he actually has to work harder to get rid of a colorless deck in mill. But, typically you're not going to see that trigger all that often anyway, so it doesn't really make that big of a difference. 5/6 mana. For an endless one for 6. And Eldrazi Mimic becomes an 8/8 until the end of turn. And he attacks all in. That'll be 14 damage. Fiery Impulse to kill the Hangerback Walker. That'll keep him alive for 1 turn. Let me think. What does he have? Send to sleep. Could tap 2 creatures. And not let them untap. What he really needs is something to clear the board, and, well, what is it? Crush of Tentacles is a new card that would save him here. I don't know that it would ultimately win him the game or not. Seismic Rupture, 2 damage to each creature without flying. And he concedes the match, or the game, excuse me. Well, this colorless deck is really, I'll say it's very good against this mill deck. Red and blue mill, so far, colorless looks like it's a pretty solid opponent. It's really hard for him to deal with creatures. And that's one of the things that the colorless deck does a lot of, is creatures, and a lot of big creatures. So let's go to game 2. Alright, turn 2 Eldrazi Mimic. Respond from the other side is an Anticipate. And there was 2 full minutes of sideboarding, which I assume was mainly on the red and blue side, because I can't really think of anything the colorless deck could have in his sideboard that he would need against this deck that he doesn't already have in his deck. Hangerback Walker. Another Anticipate response. And Ruins puts a +1/+1 counter on the Hangerback Walker. So, turn 3, you get a 2/2 Hangerback Walker. That's pretty good. Now, Talent of the Telepath. Target opponent reveals the top 7. You cast an instant or sorcery from among them without paying the mana cost. And he whiffed. Red and blue. Matter Reshaper. Well, the red and blue deck isn't in that much trouble yet. The board isn't that unfriendly. 3 mana for Oath of Jace. Draw 3, discard 2, and then you get to scry X, where X is equal to the number of planeswalkers you control. Discarded 2 land. Fiery Impulse on the Matter Reshaper. Endbringer. Oh, that guy. 5/5. Untaps during each other player's untap step. Tap to ping. One colorless tap target creature can't attack or block this turn. Two colorless tap draw card. And he's a 5/5. Ooh, Reality Smasher. I mean, we've seen him. We saw him in the last game. We see him in this game. I mean, that card is really good. And in a colorless deck, I would be running 4 of these easily. These guys are probably your best creature. You know, early to mid-game creature. Worst matchup ever for this deck. I'd have to check the deck list myself, but you know, this is a pretty bad matchup at the very least. Well, it needs it to do extra work. Tutelage works just fine when you don't hit colors, because in a mill deck based on Sphinx's tutelage, your whole point is to draw a bunch of cards. You know, colorless or not, you're going to be milling their deck. And Oblivion Sower. He's another really, really good card at a reasonable mana cost. But Red-Blue sees that and decides to concede. I don't blame him. His deck was having a really hard time dealing with this deck, mainly because of how big these creatures tended to be. You know, if they were smaller, he had ways of killing small creatures, you know, en masse. Whatever that was, the one that dealt 2 damage to all non-flyers, Fiery Impulse. He probably has Kozilek's Return in his deck too. Radiant Flames. You know, he has ways of mass killing smaller creatures. Or if he, you know, is able to stack those spells, he can kill bigger creatures. But he'd have to, against this deck, most of the time, he'd have to have 2 of those at minimum to be able to have a chance. But there you go, folks. Maybe a new deck type in Standard. Colorless Eldrazi. And he was facing off against Red-Blue Mill. And if you liked what you saw,